Well, it was 20 years ago that I made a critical decision to become a medical liaison, and I want to tell you why. At the time, I was a postdoctoral fellow working full-time for Aventis, for a leader who was highly respected in the industry in medical education. We were excited about the prospect of a first-in-class endocannabinoid receptor antagonist for obesity and smoking cessation, building together a $15 million budget. And so during that fellowship year, I got to know many of the medical liaisons who were given a specific budget for their territories to manage their medical education. And I remember how I was fascinated by how they passionately defended their medical education grants in their territory. So my presentation is going to center around the question of how we can distribute our accountability a little bit differently. What would happen to our motivation if we did that? Okay. My name is Timmik. I'm CEO and co-founder of Amedea Pharma, an analytics agency that focuses on bridging the gap between performance and organizational change. And during my 20 years, even though I have witnessed firsthand how medical teams demonstrate their excellence through investigator-initiated studies that change the standard of care in cholesterol treatment. And later on in my career, I also had the chance of leading medical teams to author head-to-head studies against the market leader working in a startup that directly drove the business. However, there is no medical excellence without a continuous quality improvement system. I know you have set aside your time in order to reflect and take best practices to your organizations and your teams. And I also know that work doesn't seem to stop in medical affairs today, right? We better make it count, right? So in order to do that, we need to redefine our concepts of work and performance. We're all motivated and excited when our products are covered on the formularies or our physicians tell us that their patients reach targets. In the same way, we're excited when our physician tells us after an annual visit our health is in great shape, or we run our first 10K or marathon, right? Or when we receive a bonus at the end of the year, a recognition, right, which allows us to take that vacation, for example, right? When we check our bank account, how our personal P&L statement. However, we're not that motivated to capture our performance every day, right? Check our balances, right, online, right, every day, or go to the gym until we're injured, until there's insufficient funds, for example, right? So if we change our habits, we can potentially change our results as well. And so we're going to talk about a quality improvement system that we're going to build together that Amedea Pharma calls DeepMetrics, data science precision, okay? It's merging sports elements and data science together. And so it consists of 3 steps, which we will explore in more detail. Setting clear benchmarks, right? Capturing quality data based on feedback from the customers and colleagues we impact directly, right? Tracing those outcomes back to our teams. And then raising new standards, modifying goals more often in order to justify the resources that we need, that we merit, that ultimately drive the business and patient outcomes. So you can imagine, as a company that is focused on merging sports and data science together to drive performance, how happy I was when I read a Forbes article from end of May from JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon, who called on modern CEO leaders to work on getting better every day, right? Where sports is no longer a metaphor. And so today, yes, we most of us measure metrics, right? Which ultimately also drive our behaviors and culture. How well medical works with sales or with clinical development also ultimately determines whether or not we meet those goals. Yet most companies separate these two, the technical performance with customers. We capture a lot of metrics on insights on activities, but not those motivational behaviors, incentives, right? So when you have multiple functions that have a shared set of customers, but only one is recognized more than the other, it's not a surprise when they don't collaborate very effectively, right? So if we are able to combine both the performance and the motivation, the behaviors and internal operations, then we are going to not only measure and report, but actually master our performance. So Amedea Pharma confirmed this hypothesis of what I've seen for 20 years in this survey of pharma companies, 51 pharma companies across the globe, together with MAPS, Medical Affairs Professional Society, and the Boston Consulting Group, that show that 70% of organizations in medical affairs do not analyze how their activities drive outcomes, which leaves a lot of decisions to guesswork, right? Which we make based on inconsistent data, disconnected platforms, and many blind spots. But ultimately leads to inaccurate forecasting of the resources that we actually need and that are critical. And so during a very difficult time in COVID, which we also experienced a few years ago, I came across this quote from Edwin Friedman, that a leader is someone who's able to describe reality without laying blame, which means when we talk about accountability, we should not assume blame, okay? And the accountability needs to be measurable, right? We all know this quote from William Deming, right? That if you cannot measure it, you cannot improve it. But not many of us also know that it was Deming himself who also said that the key factors to performance and management are usually not seen, okay, by leaders. And ultimately, we all want our medical liaisons to be self-driven, right? The best government is the one that's least governed. However, we need to govern with the right metrics, right? And then step aside in order for them to be motivated so that we can also measure motivational behaviors, those difficult, challenging metrics to measure. And so the reality today is that the accountability has never been greater for medical affairs, and margins for error have never been smaller, right? So whether or not you like metrics, there is an executive right now, as we speak, who is using some form of data analytics that may or may not be relevant to your medical affairs team in order to distinguish the high performers versus the low performers, okay? So the alternative here is for us in medical affairs to own our rigorous scientific quality improvement system to provide it as an option, right? To measure and master performance as well. So what does the research say? Well, the 2023 survey from Viva showed that medical affairs are recognizing that we're currently measuring activities, but we should be measuring outcomes, right? Our impact on clinical outcomes and behaviors. More recent data, okay, from 2025 from the MSL Society, in a survey of over 1,000 MSLs, over 63 countries, shows that the largest gaps between the current KPIs and the preferred KPIs are in the quality. We need to be measuring the quality of our HCP engagements, our feedback from KOLs, as well as the quality of the actionable insights. When we ask physicians for feedback, they are also recognizing that the quality varies substantially, okay, from one company to the next. And they see how we don't have any coordination internally. 44% of them see that a sales rep may visit them and an MSL, but they don't know about the other actually having an interaction with the physicians. And so that's what we refer to as internal collaborations and those unseen behaviors that we need to also keep track of. Now, there are success stories, and I want to talk to you about two. I recently spoke to a global medical affairs leader from a large pharma company who shared this story of how he led two cross-functional teams. He broke down barriers between medical and sales. They each brought two KPIs, which were compliant. This was blessed by compliance. So medical did not have sales targets. okay? And they rated each other for a year. And the criteria they used were 50% performance, and they weighed behavior 50%, which is the only pure formula for sportsmanship, one that we have been educating the community at Amedea Pharma for years, since 2019. And so what I was glad to hear was how they were able to improve performance and teamwork. Middle line managers became coaches and subject matter experts as well. Now, here's another one-year case study in which we were involved, Amedea Pharma. We were called in for field force effectiveness and medical information operations for a first-in-class type 1 diabetes product in one startup company that was receiving lots of questions, medical information inquiries from all over the world. Okay, and they were overwhelmed. They only had one SOP, two metrics. We came in and we distributed accountability, the central focal point of my presentation today, right? Between field medical and medical information. We added KPIs, but most importantly, we created one central master performance database, increased frequency and cadence of communication of these metrics, which ultimately increased productivity fourfold. And we started to measure time to fulfillment, which is important in preventing hospitalizations, right? Increasing treatment adherence. Right? We decreased the time from 4.3 days to 2.2 days. Next slide. And so that case study is what led us to develop a platform that allows you to implement this quality improvement system called ANCORA, which is a centralized view that allows you to manage your KPIs as well as talent and strategy, okay, in one location. So it addresses that underlying need that we all have in medical affairs, which is to translate our daily contributions, our collaborations within and outside of medical into impact, okay? And so while we are great at capturing lots of valuable data points, insights, social listening, separately, right, in this chaos that we have, right, what we now are able to do is to integrate these metrics, to have integrated metrics which allow us to coordinate the relationships between these separate data points, okay, that we're measuring, and how they relate to the outcomes, right? And so while we have been used to capturing dashboards, which are very important to provide us with instant views of the progress that we're making, now we also have retrieval augmented generation, LLMs, generative AI, that allows us to now control the context, right? Retain context-specific information and outputs based on our management, right? Which is very important in medical affairs in order to make sure that the information is relevant, right? So this allows us to know what the evidence is, right? And still have us in the loop, right? So what ANCORA does is allows us to not only see the evidence, but also to keep track of the quality of the KPIs. What is the quality? What are the strengths of the recommendations of those KPIs? And also to explain our decisions, to build a stronger business case for the resources that you need or for the changes that you need to make. Now, there is, of course, emergence of agentic AI, okay, now that we have to talk about, which is allowing us to step aside and have technology now search a lot of information. However, it's limited by low explainability, unlike RAG, LLMs, and generative AI, okay? And it varies substantially in KPI quality. And very importantly, it avoids the internal operations or those unseen behaviors, those motivational factors when it gives you that next best action. So the question here is not which model do you use, but the better question is when do you use each of these three and how do you combine them and layer the technology, okay? So the relevance of metrics also changes in different stages of your product, of your company. And that case study of the type 1 diabetes product where Amedea helped a startup company, we actually, this master database was instrumental in the integration, in a successful integration into a larger company as well, much larger global company. So now I'd like to take a quick break and ask all of you about what's important to you and who's in the room. I know many of you. You can scan the QR code here with your phone. Okay. I know probably more than half of you in the room, but let's see how many of us here are in medical affairs, other functions. Okay, and we can pull up the results as you vote very quickly. There's only 2 questions here. So those of you who are coming in also feel free to scan QR code with your phone. Next slide. Okay, and the first question is just about your role. And the second one is, how do you ensure continuous quality improvement? You can pull up the results, yeah, if we have them. And then we'll go back to the quality improvement system that we're going to build together. So looks like I see about half the team here who are team leaders, and a lot of new faces in the room as well. Okay, so we can show the results if we can. If not, we'll let's take a maybe show of hands here. How many of you are team leaders right now in medical affairs? Okay, great. Is anyone outside of medical affairs here in the room? No? Okay. Oh, we have one? Okay, great. Do we have the next question? Next question is, how do you ensure continuous improvement and medical excellence? Since we don't have any results here, we can pull them up later. Let's now actually bring these concepts together and implement this DeepMetrics sports and data science model to drive performance. Okay. Before you start, what is critical is to divide everything that you do into activities and outcomes. So simplify all the metrics that you're capturing, and then rank your priorities. It's critical for us to reach higher. Okay, meaning we need to map our activities to those bottom line outcomes that the company posts in their website and quarterly earnings reports, right? Extract the medical relevant data that's compliant from them in order to connect your teams, how they map to those bottom line outcomes. Right? In one type 1, actually in an oncology launch previously, where the company, the medical affairs was instrumental yet wasn't recognized, we actually came up with our own definition that you see on the bottom there, right? Changing behaviors or strategy with an internal or external stakeholder that involves learning and teaching. And so when we aim a little bit higher, we're able to now share the views with our team members that the executives have as well, because they want to see the size of the team and the relative contribution that they're making, as well as the network mapping, right? These are the C's that you can now share with your team members in order for them to be more motivated as well. Next. And so you're able to now differentiate outcomes based on parameters that you set in this AI algorithm that you build, right? A global outcome is going to be scored higher. And also apply data science principles, okay? Weighing the relationship between activities and outcomes, relevance or causation. If an activity is approved by the team lead to be causal, it'll score higher. Here's the outcomes. And so now that you've aligned on the parameters, now you're ready to set clear benchmarks, okay? So list external and internal activities. Then you rank them by priority, right? If you want to motivate more formal presentations among your MSLs, next slide, then you're going to increase the impact value, right? So that it has 4, for example, versus 1, right? Which would be a reference value, impact point value. And also include KPIs that describe that particular activity. Next, you now are ready to capture quality data. What does that mean? It means we need to link our activities to outcomes. Next slide. And let's take this case example of a new product launch for a CNS company. Small company has 3 MSLs. Okay, and we all know this journey that we take, right? In January, 1 MSL, Philip here in this case, identifies a KOL who's the chair of a task force for guidelines. Another one, a P&T member at a formulary. And 6 months later, in July, the company announces on their website publicly that they are now in one of the top 3 GPOs in the country. Right? We all know and are familiar with this journey to outcomes. However, what makes the difference is how we document it and whom we communicated with. Okay, so the way to ensure quality is to minimize recall bias, which is very actual in the real world. The sooner you're able to capture the data after it happens, right, and the simpler that process, so that you don't have multiple drop downs, the higher the integrity. Right. So in this case, you don't even have to press a submit button. You just advance from a daily view. What are the activities that are assigned to me, and how many did I complete today? Next slide. You have also notification settings that you can set for your teams, okay, in order to make sure that the data doesn't have bias, right? Asking questions like which colleagues, which customers did you interact with, making that logging and capturing very simple and seamless. Now, here's where the sports principles come into the daily operations, okay? When you capture outcomes, the system reminds you to trace it to some previous activity, okay? So this is where intentionality is very important, right? And allowing you to describe that relationship that sports athletes have. When they run a personal record, for example, in order to replicate it, they have to analyze what muscles they trained, right? What were their split times, for example, right? So that's the same concept. And so you get an error message. That's why that is there in that slide. Instead, what you are able to see is how 5 different team members now contributed to this new hospital protocol that's now implemented by your PI, primary investigator, okay? They see each other's activities that are linked to that outcome, and now they're motivated to also link their own as well. Quality data means, as we mentioned earlier from the research, capturing the data from our customers, right? So there are surveys that you can configure here. They're built in, take 1 minute, and there's specific surveys that tie back to your campaigns that you may have led, right? How did this particular medical interaction or series improve your clinical outcomes? And you're able to generate that data simply. Secondly, you also need to capture general data from customers and your colleagues, your best judges and referees, right? On both performance and behavior, okay? They may be every quarter, they are quantified, you can configure them as well, and they're scored, they feed into a dashboard, okay? And you see examples there of behavior and performance scores. And so now is the final step, raising new standards, right? So it starts with recognizing your teams, okay? Linking their talent, their incentives to outcomes. You can see the impact that they're delivering week over week, right? These are not just counts of activities. They're weighed by impact based on the algorithm that you set. Growth, not just absolute results, but also growth over time. And KPI quality. You're able to see live graded KPI recommendations that allow you to understand the probability of outcomes based on different activities, which changes, across different stages of the life cycle, right? And also the strength of that recommendation based on, again, the algorithm that you're in control of completely, right? That you set early on, right? And so that allows you to actually spend more time doing higher impact activities, right? And also give you a view that's more holistic across the entire spectrum from customer to employee experience of the segments and based on those relationships within each, right? How are speakers rating us versus primary investigators and so forth and so on. And then, of course, you can now generate real world data on your performance based on how you're directly impacting outcomes in this type of dashboard from that medical interaction outcome specific survey as well, showing that you're now improving treatment adherence, right? Preventing drug interactions, for example, okay, to showcase your teams. Talent management, right? So there are notifications that you can choose to use as well here, where your team members can track where they failed, whom they helped, whom they were planning to help. And they do this in leading indicators prospectively. You can export that data into the HR enterprise system that you're using, for example, right? Making it much more objective. And so now you've analyzed the data, you've recognized your teams, now you need to make some decisions, okay? So this system prompts you to make some kind of changes to your strategy, right? So this corporate contribution index is what demonstrates that impact, illuminates what we all want to see, right? Based on this composite weighted relationship between activities and outcomes. So in this case, you see field medical trailing, for example, the other functions with 3 MSLs. What that may guide you to do is to either increase the team or probably more likely change their workflow, maybe involve them in more activities that have a highest strength recommendation in the KPI recommendation dashboard that I showed earlier, okay? And very importantly, you give yourself also the opportunity to be accountable to yourself as a team lead. There are notifications that you send to yourself, okay, every quarter, for example, or at a frequency you choose, right? In this case, there's a European business in-licensing agreement that the company announces. So now you need to generate European real-world evidence in order to design endpoints in a way that will increase the likelihood of approval in those markets, right? So you track your decisions and explain why you're making these decisions, okay? In the same platform, which you can export, okay? So, ultimately what we're doing here is we're connecting the purpose of why we need to track our performance, why we need to go to the gym, right? Why we need to track our personal P&L, right? And checkbooks, right? And tie that to progress and to reward in one location, okay? So I've, worked in companies that have been very successful, as I mentioned earlier, okay, that analyze performance in greatest detail. And I saw the impact that had on medical teams that grew, that scaled to become the largest in the world, largest GI company in the world, for example. Okay, so if you're able to convert your impact into numbers and communicate it to the right people, then you'll ensure continued growth in performance. Secondly, I've also learned from failures. A company that failed despite having the best-in-class product and have attributes that far outperformed others. However, it failed because of lack of accountability for internal operations. Right? So if you're able to now distribute your accountability on your teams based on metrics and norms you set differently, then you're going to ensure more collaboration and productivity as well. Finally, if you can do it all in one central platform, you can now make decisions earlier, more often. Okay, so this is how you're able to take those corporate values that we all share here in this room, no matter what organization you're in, and bring them into reality so that they don't remain as mere aspirations. So I have some parting thoughts here. For those of you who are team leaders, okay, start today by building a strong, large medical impact benchmark, in your company. Okay, an AI algorithm is useless without data that has quality. Okay, medical affairs is a long endurance sport, so celebrate small wins along that journey. It's also team sport, where medical affairs is not the only team and function that contributes to those bottom line outcomes. Okay, but you need to find a way to creatively trace those outcomes back to what your contribution was in order to secure the resources that you need at the right time. And finally, when you choose a system, choose one that is fit for the future, that can help you not only measure activity, but actually improve it over time, across this uncertainty or more in the future. And for the next one. For those of you who are team members today, you fail not because you aim too high and you miss, but because you aim too low and hit the target, okay? So capture that quality data from the customers, from colleagues that you've been seeking based on the research that I showed earlier. Failure is an integral part of quality improvement system, okay? Forgive yourself and others. Focus on why, on the root cause, so that you prevent the same mistake again, and then fail again at something new and enter the cycle again. Okay, I had the honor of interviewing Michael Rubin, who reported to Reed Hastings, the CEO of Netflix, who told me a story that the 5 of them, executives who were reporting to him, were given a $1 million mistake to make. Okay, they went through an intense Socratic method with which they had to defend their budget, but this is the attribute of a learning modern organization that's going to ensure continuous quality improvement. Okay, and then finally, treats performance as athletes do, who are proud to share their diaries of previous records, okay, with their competitors or their teammates, in order to set your own personal team records. So, get in touch with us. We are a team of medical and commercial executives, Olympians as well, who consult the NHS UK. Let's write a new chapter in medical excellence together by the power of accountability and motivation. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.